Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
Do you have a fear of clowns? Well, this story is probably the reason why. This is the terrifying true story of a killer clown, or as many of you may know him better, John Wayne Gacy, one of the most infamous serial killers of all time. But let's start all the way back at the beginning. John Wayne Gacy was born in 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, as the only son in a family of 5. Because of this, his already abusive and alcoholic father was extra hard on him. His mother would try to defend John. That really only made it worse, causing his father to then call him a mama's boy, a queer, a sissy. Aside from that though, he actually had a pretty good relationship with his mother and his 2 sisters. Well, that was until his mother had discovered he had stolen a pair of her underwear and hid it underneath the house. I mean, he was reprimanded for this and he stopped doing it until he was 15, where he then went to some of his neighbors' clothesline and stole their underwear, hiding them in the same place. So already there were signs that he was not totally normal, but it didn't really come up again. I mean, he went on to live a pretty normal, perfect life, getting married to his first wife, Marilyn, having 2 children, opening a few businesses. He was involved in politics, all around a standout character in his community. Everyone loved John Wayne Gacy. Even his own father called and apologized to him, saying he was wrong about John the whole time. But of course, it was all a show. John was obsessed with teenage boys. At all of his businesses, he would only employ teenage boys, frequently asking them to come back to his house with the promise of alcohol and watching explicit movies. While this facade that John had created was all shattered in 1968, when a 15-year-old boy came forward to the police and said that John had SA'd him. John was then arrested, to the shock of literally everyone around him. He tried to get out of this arrest and conviction in many ways, even hiring someone to go and beat up the victim, try to scare him into silence. But it didn't work. And then the victim came forward with these threats as well. So he was then sentenced to 10 years in prison. After all this, John's wife quickly divorces him and takes their children with her. But, and this is insane, John only ended up serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence. He was released on parole, and then not even 6 months later, he was accused of SAing another teenage boy. But the charges were dropped only because the victim never showed up to testify in court. But now that he was free from prison, John moved and started a brand new life, almost identical to his first one. He remarried, opened another business, became a standout pillar in the community, and restarted the lie all again. And I'm sure by now you can guess the only people he hired at this new business: teenage boys. John somehow became the master of a manipulative double life. It was around this time as well that he started volunteering his time as Pogo the Clown at children's hospitals, birthday parties, charity events, making the community fall in love with him even more. But knowing what we know now makes it just that much more sinister. And this is why he's given the nickname the Killer Clown. John Wayne Gacy took the life of his first victim, 16-year-old Timothy McCoy, in 1972. He lured Timothy back to his house while his wife was out of town. We don't know what the two did together that night, but John says that when he woke up in the morning, Timothy was standing in the bedroom with what looked like a sharp weapon. John then leaped up and grabbed it, using it to stab and kill Timothy. But what John found when he walked into the kitchen was chilling. Timothy had prepared them a big, lovely breakfast with a place setting for 2. He had no intention of ever hurting John. He simply went to go wake him up so that they could enjoy a nice breakfast together before he left. And then he was killed for it. John then hid the dead body in the crawl space of the house that he shared with his wife. After this, it was a domino effect. More and more young boys kept disappearing constantly, some even being employees of John. The police did question him multiple times, but being such a well-known and liked man, he was able to get out of it every single time. The police didn't even do a background check on him. Shortly after, in 1976, John divorced his second wife. With her out of the house, John Wayne Gacy began his killing spree. He lured all of his victims back to his house in the same way, offering them alcohol or drugs or explicit film. Like I said, John was very manipulative and persuasive. When they would arrive back at his house, John would trick them into handcuffs by saying it was one of his clown magic tricks, and then he would torture and SA them for hours before killing them, most commonly by strangling them with a rope. He was burying all these victims in his crawl space, under his floors, in his backyard, and when he ran out of space, even in a nearby river. Since a lot of these boys that were being reported missing didn't come from necessarily good families, police ignored them again and again, writing them off as runaways. That was until December of 1976, when 15-year-old Robert Peace told his mother that he was going to meet with John Wayne Gacy about a potential job opportunity and then never returned home. Since Robert was an outstanding student on the honor roll, came from a good family, it didn't make sense that he would just run away. So the police finally investigated his disappearance properly. In their investigation, they had multiple witnesses say that they had seen John and Robert together that night. This led to them being able to get a warrant to search John Wayne Gacy's house, where they didn't find Robert or any bodies, but they did find ropes, duct tape, handcuffs, the driver's licenses of other missing boys, and lots of other very suspicious things. So although they couldn't prove that he did it yet, he was very much on their radar. He was actually put on 24/7 watch. In fact, he became friendly with the police that were surveilling him. So one day he goes outside while they're sitting in their car. He invites them in for a cup of coffee. The police officers agree. And then when one goes to use the bathroom, he caught a smell of something coming up from the air vent underneath his feet. A smell that he knew was too specific to be anything else. It was the smell of death. The officer then runs out of the bathroom and tells John that he's going to get another warrant and that he will be coming back. At this point, John kind of knew that his time was up. I mean, he was literally sitting on a pile of bones. He then went to his lawyers and confessed to them that he had tortured, SA'd, and killed over 30 young men and boys. He was then arrested at the age of 36 and confessed to every detail. He even helped the police locate all the bodies. 29 were found in and around his house after the police literally had to tear it apart, and 4 others were found in the nearby rivers. All the victims that they could identify were between the ages of 14 and 21. Some of them, though, still have not been identified because their bones had fused together. Also, just another messed up piece of information. Every single one of these murders took place in the time that John should have been in jail for the first SA of that young boy. Obviously, he was found guilty of all 33 murders and was sentenced to the death penalty. He was then executed in May of 1994. If you didn't have a fear of clowns before, I'm sure you probably do now. Also, a piece of personal lore, his house is in the town where I grew up. I mean, obviously it wasn't in his time, but I lived like 5 minutes from him. Ugh.
A real true crime case of a killer clown. On the morning of May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren had a visitor at her door. When she opened her door, standing in front of her was a clown holding flowers and balloons. Before Marlene even knew what was happening, the clown took out a revolver and shot her in the face. Since it's now October, you guys have been asking me to cover the most terrifying true crime cases I know, and truly, what is scarier than a real killer clown? Marlene's son and some of his friends were over for breakfast, and they could see everything that happened. They saw the clown just turn around and walk slowly, silently back to the car that they came in, get in the car, and just drive away like nothing happened. Marlene was rushed to the hospital, but sadly passed away 2 days later from her injuries. When a woman is killed, the first person that investigators look at is the husband. Marlene and Mike Warren owned multiple properties and businesses together, but they were also having severe marital problems. Marlene suspected that her husband Mike had been having an affair, and that she was even afraid for her life. She told multiple people before she passed away that if something happened to her, her husband was the one that did it. But her husband had an airtight alibi. It could not have been him that came to her house dressed like a clown and had shot her. Could he have hired someone? And what about the woman that he was having this rumored affair with? That woman was Sheila Keene. Sheila was also married actually to a member of the KKK. And it was pretty well known knowledge that Sheila and Michael were having an affair, that they were sleeping together, although they always denied it. They claimed that they were just friends. But even Sheila's own neighbors thought that Michael was her husband instead of her actual KKK husband because of how often Michael was over at her house. But just because two people may or may not be having an affair is not enough to charge someone with murder. Well, luckily, the investigators started to gather a lot of convincing evidence. They were able to track down the costume shop where the clown costume had been purchased. The owners of the costume shop said that 2 days before Marlene was killed, a woman with dark brown hair and big brown eyes came after closing to the shop, frantically saying that she needed to get in because she needed to get a clown costume. This would be, typical behavior if it was the day before Halloween, but this was in the middle of spring. And the owners of that costume shop were able to identify Sheila as that woman from a photo lineup. And the same description of the same woman, long brown hair, big brown eyes, was seen at the Publix grocery store right near Marlene's house the day that she passed away, purchasing those flowers and balloons that the clown was holding. 4 days after Marlene was killed, the same car that the clown was seen driving was found abandoned in a parking lot 8 miles away. In the backseat of the car was a Publix grocery store bag, so things are lining up, and inside of the bag were orange wig fibers, likely from the orange clown wig. And that same car had actually been reported stolen. It was from a used car shop that Marlene's husband Michael was the owner of, so things are not looking good. And speaking of Marlene's husband Michael, investigators do not trust this man. They believe that Michael and his mistress Sheila were the ones that killed Marlene, so they start investigating every single aspect of Michael's life. They start investigating his businesses. Remember, him and Marlene owned a lot of businesses together, and they actually found out that Michael had been committing a lot of fraud through his businesses. They actually charged him with 43 counts of fraud and racketeering, and he went to prison for 3 years because of this. After his release, him and Sheila both just kind of disappeared. They both left the area and no one knew where they went. And that's all that the investigators had for a really, really long time. This case went unsolved for years and years. Luckily, the investigators could not let this case go. Even independent journalists were unable to let this case go. They demanded that Marlene's case did not go unsolved, and what they were able to find next was shocking. Turns out, 12 years after Marlene was killed, her husband Michael married Sheila in a secret wedding. Now remember, Michael always denied having an affair with Sheila. Sheila, who was the prime suspect in his wife's murder. He married the prime suspect in his wife's murder 12 years later in a secret wedding. It's like super suspicious. It had been years since Marlene had been killed, and investigators and independent journalists were able to work together and finally track down Michael and Sheila. Turns out, after being married in secret for a little bit, the two of them actually moved to states together. They opened a restaurant together. Sheila had dyed her hair suspiciously the same color as Marlene's hair, looking like her husband's dead wife, kind of weird. Sheila was also going by a new name, and everyone that knew Sheila and Michael in this new area that went to their restaurant all the time had no idea that the two of them had ever been married before. They did not know that Michael had a dead wife. They knew nothing about any of this. This is when we found out that the investigators were actually holding on to a really, really big piece of evidence. They had DNA that was left in that car that the clown had drove that was abandoned in that parking lot. But DNA testing was not the same in the 90s that it was now. But the investigators kept onto it just in case DNA testing ever got better. So they start retesting all of their old DNA, and that's when they finally linked Sheila's DNA to the DNA that they found in the car. It had been 27 years since Marlene had been killed, and Sheila was finally arrested for murdering her on September 26, 2017. And I bet for those nearly 3 decades, Sheila believed that she had gone away with it. They actually found a photo that was taken years after Marlene was killed of Sheila at a Halloween party, and guess what she dressed up as? She dressed up as a clown. Tell me that's not the sickest, most evil thing you've ever heard of. And I bet in her mind, she thought it was funny. dressing up like a clown for Halloween a few years after killing Marlene while dressed up as a clown. Originally, the prosecution was going for the death penalty in the trial of Sheila Keene, but after the trial was postponed so many times during like the 2020 pandemic, they ended up offering her a plea deal, and sadly she did take the plea deal, and it was if she pled guilty to killing Marlene that they would only give her 12 years in prison, and she's expected to be released next year in 2025. Apparently, there was never enough evidence to charge Michael Warren in the murder of his wife. As of right now, only Sheila has ever been charged, which really upsets me because I feel like we had enough evidence to charge Sheila. So if we were going to offer her a plea deal, it would have been to incriminate Michael. But definitely let me know your thoughts on that. I doubt I'm not the only person that also believes that Michael is guilty and this was a conspiracy that he came up with his mistress Sheila to kill his wife. And I bet that that's going to be frustrating for a lot of you that, like me, believe that Michael Warren as of right now has gotten away with the murder of his wife. And honestly, Sheila got away with only kind of a slap on the wrist. You know, she got to live freely for 27 years before being arrested and then was sentenced to only 12 years.
Today I watched the movie Gags the Clown on Shudder, and it made me want to look up creepy clown stories. So this one's called The Clown in the Closet. Also, tell me if she moves, okay? Two best friends decided to have a sleepover, and like friends do during a sleepover, they were looking up creepy stories, and it happened to be creepy clown stories. So they look up the clown stories and they creep themselves out and then kind of wrap it up, and they go up to the attic to go and get like sleeping bags and blankets, and they see this old trunk. So they go through the trunk thinking there's going to be extra blankets in there, and instead, oddly enough, they find this old clown costume, and it looks super aged and like yellowed, but the mask is just more creepy and sinister than funny, like a typical clown costume. So one of the friends is like making jokes and she wants to bring it to the room. The other friend's like, no, but she does it anyway. She brings it to the room and she sits it in the chair and poses it like it's watching them. Their names are Ellie and Megan. So Ellie's like, okay, enough. And Megan's like, no, this is hilarious. Megan's the one who posed him, right? So anyway, they go eat dinner and they come back and Megan looks at the clown in the chair and she's like, Ellie, did you move this? And Ellie's like, no, I didn't touch that. You're just trying to scare me. And Ellie was like, no, I didn't touch it. You probably like bumped it when you walked by. Megan's like, I did not touch that thing. This is not how we left it. The thing that was freaking them out is that now the mask looked like it was facing the bed where they were laying. And both are obviously like, I didn't touch it, blah, 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 whatever. So they both feel creeped out, but they don't want to really admit that they feel creeped out because they think it's stupid. And Megan just is like, she grabs it and throws it in the closet and she's like, problem solved. Okay, now we don't have to worry about it. So they turn off all the lights, they get in their sleeping bags and they're getting ready to go to sleep. And Ellie can't stop thinking about this creepy ass like mask or costume. She swore that the eyes were following them and that the smile kept getting a little too wide. She laid there for hours, and as soon as she started to fall asleep, she heard laughter. But it was like soft and muffled as if it was coming from behind a door. So she thinks it's Megan messing with her. So she nudges her and she's like, can you stop? And Megan was completely asleep, like normal breathing, no laughter. She knew nothing about what was going on. So then she hears it again, and this time she wakes Megan up and is like, hey, like I'm here, I hear laughter. I hear laughing. I can tell it's coming from the closet. You gotta get up. And Megan's like rubbing her eyes. She was completely asleep, and then Megan hears it too. So they just froze. They were obviously way too scared to move or go and look. But finally, Megan turns the flashlight on her phone and goes over to the closet. And they open the closet door, and the costume is laying on the ground, obviously where they threw it. But the mask was staring directly up at them, and they swear that the smile was way, way, way wider than before. So Megan grabs the costume. She's like, I'm not staying here with this freaking thing. And they put it back in a box, tape it up, take it back to the attic. They obviously did not sleep for the rest of the night because they were too scared and creeped out. So the next morning they go to check the attic and see if this thing is in there, and the box was ripped open and the costume was missing. They never found it, but she swears she can sometimes still hear the faint laughter coming from her closet.
Today we are going to cover the secret life of the serial killer or killer clown John Wayne Gacy. Gacy was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 17, 1942. Gacy was the middle child to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Robinson and had 2 sisters. Gacy was close to his mother and 2 sisters, but had a really difficult relationship with his father, whom was physically abusive and an alcoholic. His father was known to call him sissy, dumb, and stupid. Gacy had a really hard time living up to his father's standards because he was constantly comparing him to his other 2 siblings. In September 1964, Gacy married his co-worker, Marlon Myers, after 6 months of dating. Marlon's father owned 3 KFC restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa, and asked Gacy to manage them. The twisted double life of Gacy started around August 1967 when he lured 15-year-old Donald Voorhees into his basement. His method was through alcohol and the promise to watch sexual explicit films. Go to part 2.
Supposed to be a normal Sunday morning to when she went to go grab her morning paper on her front step, only to be shocked to look up and see a clown with the most unsettling smile on its face, having blood dripping down its forehead with a gun pointed directly at her. What sounds like a horror movie is actually the unfortunate real story of Sheila Warren in The Killer Clown. On May 26 of 1990 in Wellington, Florida, Marlene Warren was having breakfast with a friend and her son when she heard the doorbell ring. The horrific thing that was standing outside her door was not a person, it was actually someone dressed in a clown costume, the full-blown thing with blood dripping down its face. It was not only standing there, it was aiming a pew-pew directly at Marlene and then eventually pulled the trigger and pew-pewed her in the face. After the gunshots were heard, it was heard that the clown just ran off into the distance with a very hysterical and unsettling laugh. Marlene was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately 2 days later was announced unalived. Police immediately began investigating. Witness actually described that the clown's car was left at a public supermarket not even 10 miles away from the scene. Costume was also tracked down by a receipt that was left by the clown while running away to a local party city a few miles down. The costume was so distinct that the clerk actually remembered who the person they sold it to. This is when the investigation takes a turn for the worst. With this man, Marlene's husband, Michael Warren, it's when it came out that Michael, while married to Marlene, was having an affair with this woman, Sheila Keene, a younger woman at the time who worked for Michael at his car dealership, yet it wasn't confirmed that Sheila had anything to do with it, but she was known by her friends and family to be absolutely psychotic. Yet there were rumors around the town that Sheila supposedly wanted Marlene out of the picture so she could have Michael all to herself and she wouldn't let anything stop her. Even though the police had suspicions from community and talk that Sheila might have had something to do with this, DNA testing was actually not strong enough in the 1990s to prove anything. Years go by and nothing's proven. No one's able to figure out who the killer clown was until the early 2000s when Sheila and Michael conveniently actually got married and moved to Tennessee. They ended up starting a restaurant together and starting a whole new life in a neighborhood in Tennessee with friends and family thinking they're just a normal hardworking couple. Little do those people know that Sheila and Michael share a very dark and horrific past. Fast forward to 2014 when actually investigators are digging back into Marlene's case and now have advanced enough DNA processing to open the case back up. And who would have thought the only person that the DNA matched up to was Sheila Warren. After the DNA was connected, not even 27 years after the killer clown attack happened, Sheila Warren was arrested in her house in Virginia. This court case took forever because Sheila's legal team did such a good job, and actually after many years of delays and debates on whether Sheila should get life in prison or the pew-pew penalty, it finally came to a conclusion. Sheila pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and actually was only sentenced to 12 years in prison. Never believe this part. Sheila Warren only served 18 months of her entire prison sentence. A lot of this case just does not sit right with me on why she dressed like a clown, and Michael Warren, her former husband, wasn't even looked at in this case. There's a lot more to unpack on this case and many more like it, so make sure to let me know what you guys think down below. And honestly, after researching this story, I am now officially terrified of clowns.
So tell me how you feel when you look at this photo. Do you feel nauseous? Are you experiencing any sweating or maybe an irregular heartbeat or even difficulty breathing? If so, you might have chlorophobia, the fear of clowns. But clowns were not meant to be scary, so how did all of this happen? Some of the earliest depictions of clowns can actually be dated back to ancient Egypt, but the earliest that we can trace back the modern day clown is back to Greek and Roman theater. But this wasn't necessarily a character with crazy hair or a big red nose. This was more of like the village idiot. And and many of the jokes were towards the wealthy people in the audience. And in the 16th century, words like clown and clone entered into the English dictionary. And in the 17th century, we saw the development of the harlequin, who was a brightly dressed trickster who could perform acrobatic tricks. And they would carry around these sticks to like slap people on the butt, and that's how we ended up coining the term slapstick. It was just hilarious back then. And by the 18th century, the modern clown started to take shape because this was a staple in every British theater show. And in the 19th century, we finally saw the circus clown. He was sent to amuse the audience in between acts. We finally saw things like ruffled collars, big hats, oversized shoes. In the 1930s, after the Great Depression, you started to see this sad clown trope. This is Emmett Kelly. He became very famous for playing this sad, homeless clown, which is apparently who Krusty is loosely based off of. But none of these are depictions of evil clowns. So where do evil clowns come from?
No, because why are my braids so skinny? And I'm not. If they weren't in front of me, I bet you they would disappear with the green screen. Get distracted by the pizzas. So this girl says that this story has been told to her by her mom several times, and this happened when she was 3 years old. She says that one day her mom needed to go to the little store that was right across from their home, and being that she was calm and playing with some toys and that her older sibling was asleep, she decided to leave her there and just go straight to the store and come back. However, when her mom came back to the house, she found her crying and very, very pale. And because she was 3 and started talking already, she asked her what was wrong. Her mom says that in between her crying, she would point at the window and say, "Clown, clown." The mom explains to her that she got very scared because they lived on the second floor and the window didn't have like a balcony for somebody to be there. She attempted to console her and just calm her down because she did notice that her child was so scared. The next day, she needed to go to that little store again, but because of what happened, she decided to take both of her daughters with her. When she went to the store, obviously that lady that works there noticed that she had brought her kids with her and was like, "Oh, you just came with the kids really quickly." And her mom started to explain to the lady what had happened and why she's deciding to bring the kids with her now. Her mom says that when she told the lady what had happened, the lady got very serious and told her that she didn't want to tell her what happened in that land, but before they built those apartments, there was a really big tall tree, and that unfortunately somebody had taken their own life on that tree. The mom got really scared, and she even told her husband when he got home from work what had happened on that land and what the daughter claims to have seen on that window. After talking it through for a little bit, they decided that they were going to move away from that place because they believed that it could be haunted. Now that she's older, she says that she doesn't remember a clown, but she is very curious and wants to know what is the correlation between the clown and like the haunted land. Now she says that her parents never wanted to look into it at all. So she has to live with the fact that she will never know what happened or why she saw a clown. Can you imagine a freaking haunting and it's a clown? Like, it's not even just like a regular person. No, thank you.
Killer clown from season 4 of American Horror Story Twisty is inspired by the real-life infamous serial killer John Wayne Gacy Jr., who collectively tortured and murdered 33 young men and boys between 1972 to 1978. From the outside looking in, Gacy was a friendly, church-attending man who was extremely involved with his community. In fact, he, his second wife Carol, and their stepchildren would host huge block parties at their house for the entire neighborhood, where he would dress up as his alter ego, Pogo the Clown, to entertain the local children. On top of this, he owned a successful construction company, so everyone from neighbors to police seemed to know and like him. Although in December of 1978, that perception of Gacy would change forever when police began to pull an assembly line of bodies out from underneath the floorboards of his suburban home. And at that point in time, Gacy would hold the record for being one of the most prolific serial killers within the history of the US. But if we take a step back before the murders, there were all the red flags of the monster he really was. In 1964, before any of the murders took place, Gacy was a married man who lived in Waterloo, Iowa with his first wife Marilyn and their 2 children. Although in May of 1968, their marriage would crumble when Gacy is arrested after assaulting 2 teenage boys. In fact, he would assault one of these boys at his own home when his wife Marilyn was at the hospital giving birth to their child. So for obvious reasons, when this all comes out, Marilyn divorces Gacy. On November 7th, 1968, Gacy would plead guilty to assaulting one of the boys and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. But after only 18 months, he's released on parole. And then he gets approval from his probation officer to relocate to Chicago where he starts his new life. By 1976, Gacy was remarried to wife number 2, Carol, and at this point he's exhausted with living a double life, so he confesses to her that he's bisexual. Ultimately, the 2 divorce and Gacy is now left at home alone, which means he's free to indulge in all of the dark, twisted fantasies that he has thought about for years. This is when he starts to lure young boys and men back to his home with false promises of work, alcohol, or other substances. Once he'd get a victim back to his home, he would then keep them captive before he would torture, assault, and then strangle them. And he does this without a hitch so frequently that he develops a ritual that he just continues to do this again and again. Although things would all start to unravel on December 11th, 1978, when a mother goes to pick up her 15-year-old son named Robert Piest after he finished working a shift at the local pharmacy. But before his shift's over, he tells his mother that he first wants to talk to a man who had offered him a construction job that would apparently pay him double of what he was currently making at the pharmacy. Robert would tell his mom that this won't take long, it will only be a few minutes, and then I'll be out to the car. But as she's waiting there and time continues to pass by, her confusion on what's taking so long suddenly becomes concern when she goes into the pharmacy and she sees that Robert's not there. So she asks the pharmacist, do you have any idea on who Robert was talking to? And that's when the pharmacist says, oh, it might be John Gacy because his construction company is actually just finishing up work here at the pharmacy. And that would just make sense because he was just here. Mother has enough common sense and intuition to know that this isn't right. If Robert said it was only going to take a few minutes, then it would. It doesn't make sense on why he would just be missing in action almost an hour later. So she leaves the pharmacy, goes home, picks up the rest of the family, and they go to the police station to report Robert missing because this is not like him. And then once police begin to investigate, one of the first people they talk to is John Gacy, since the employees at the pharmacy said that that's who Robert was talking to before he left. And police are also aware that Gacy was previously arrested for assaulting 2 young teen boys in Iowa, and mind you, Robert was 15, so right away it automatically looks a little suspicious. On top of this, Gacy already had a running list of questionable things that were reported to the police. For example, before this, one of his construction employees also went missing mysteriously, and the man's family was adamant that Gacy was involved in their son's disappearance in some ways, although their pleas were ignored by police. Also, it turns out in 1976, police temporarily had Gacy under surveillance when a local 9-year-old boy went missing, but nothing came of this. Then, in 1977, a young man goes to police and says, John Gacy kidnapped me, held me at gunpoint, and assaulted me. So police actually go to question and arrest Gacy, and he would agree that, yeah, all of these things happened, except it was consensual. He wanted it. He wanted me to kidnap him and assault him. Police take his word for it and don't actually press him with any charges, and he's just free to go. Classic case of his word against the victims. If all of this wasn't enough, police were also being inundated with complaints from locals that there was a man named John who was cruising the local parks to pick up young men who all seemed to vanish after they left with him. And for those that don't know, cruising essentially is like trying to pick up people on the spot for some favors, if you catch my drift. So if all of this evidence wasn't enough, police were forced to actually take action when Robert goes missing, since Gacy was last seen talking to him and Gacy's construction company had just finished renovating the pharmacy that Robert worked at. So police reach out and call Gacy and they ask him to come in for an interview, and he says, sure, no problem, I'll be in within 30 minutes, how about that? Although hours would go by and John wouldn't show up to the police station until 3 a.m. the next morning, where he's covered head to toe in mud. Which I would think would seem very suspicious, although police would say, the detective who called you is no longer here, come back in a few hours. Gacy ultimately does return, and by now police know that his car was actually towed from a snowbank by a river at 2 a.m. the hour before he showed up at the police station. And this would make them finally suspicious enough where they hold Gacy at the station and they serve him with a search warrant. Police go to his house and they quickly find a receipt from a roll of film that belonged to Robert, which confirms that Robert was at his home, at least at some point. But aside from this, police claim that there is no other mysterious evidence that they see. So Gacy is released and police just keep him under surveillance, although the next day they do identify that one of the rings that they took back to the station from Gacy's house was linked to the disappearance of another boy who went missing. Police then begin to dig a little further and they talk to Gacy's construction employees, and they also say that we've had a few employees who've worked here that just also vanished out of nowhere. Again, also seems suspicious, although the final nail in the coffin would be when Gacy sees that there's 2 police officers outside of his house because he was under surveillance, and he would try to be a nice guy and invite them into his house and say, would you like a cup of coffee? Although when these cops are inside, they smell the rot of death that is just permeating through his home. How this wasn't smelled during the initial search, I don't know. If you'd like a part 2 that goes deeper into the recovery process of Gacy's house, let me know.
I tried calling those people for help, but it seems like I'm the only person who can see this killer clown. This is day 3 of making another video of me being trapped in the killer clown house until someone rescues me. I'm so hungry and the clown only brings me 1 meal a day. People to save me, but everyone said that they couldn't see this clown in front of me. It looks like I'm going to be going back to the clown house unless this video gets 1000 comments.